Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Now, over the past few months, I have spent a lot of time testing and reviewing the new current generation mainstream GPUs from AMD and Nvidia, which should be 1440p capable, as they're priced between $270 and $400 US. But the nicest thing I can say about the entire experience is that these new products are extremely underwhelming, and there's a simple reason for this. But before we get into it, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Insta360 and their Link webcam. Boasting clear 4K image quality thanks to its half-inch sensor and very reasonable onboard audio, the Link is an impressive webcam powered by AA technology for a variety of use cases. Its ability to track your face through the use of a 3-axis gimbal makes staying in frame hands-free and simple. And the zoom via hand gesture is also a nice addition. The Link has accurate, snappy autofocus, as well as the ability to view your desk seamlessly via desk view by rotating the gimbal down 45 degrees and automatically adjusting the perspective. For those of you who wish to film or stream in portrait mode, the Link allows you to do so with a 9:16 video mode at the click of a button, which sees the gimbal rotate 90 degrees. The Link really is packed full of features, so for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so we've received the RTX 4060 Ti, which arrived at $400, then the plain old 4060 at $300, and the RX 7600 at $300. But AMD was just joking about that. They changed the price last minute to $270. What a funny prank that was. Now, these three GPUs have something in common. They're 8GB frame buffers, and the fact that they're all very underwhelming at their respective price tags. And this is particularly true for the RTX 4060 Ti, though there will be a 16GB version, which will cost even more, so can't wait for that. The RTX 4060 Ti is underwhelming, which again is the nicest way I can describe it, and that's for a few reasons. Ignoring the 8GB VRAM buffer on a $400 US graphics card in mid-2023, there are two big issues here. First and foremost, the generational uplift on offer here is a joke. As I showed in my last 50-game benchmark, the 4060 Ti is a mere 8% faster than the 3060 Ti at 1080p, and then just 5% faster at 1440p. So, case closed on that one, it sucks. But it manages to get even worse because as of September 2022, so September last year, that's 9 months ago now for those of you not counting, the 6700 XT has been available for less than $400 US, at a typical asking price of about $370. Then, as of November last year, it dropped down to $350 and has recently dipped as low as $310, though it's more commonly available for $320 US. Now, based on our day one review data, the 6700 XT is on average just 5% slower than the 4060 Ti. And not only that, but the Radeon GPU doesn't fall apart in VRAM demanding games, as it packs 50% more VRAM with a 12GB buffer, making it much better suited to 1440p gaming. Now granted, you do miss out on DLSS support with frame generation, and the ray tracing performance isn't nearly as good, providing you don't go over the 8GB VRAM buffer that is, but still, given the current 20% discount with all that extra VRAM, it's really hard to pass up the 6700 XT right now. And that's a shame because newly released current generation parts are meant to put 2.5-year-old previous gen products to rest. So for today's big benchmark video, I want to compare the 6700 XT and 4060 Ti in many more games than what we've done previously, with way more ray tracing configurations. So it'll be interesting to see how they compare. Now, for testing, the CPU used is the Ryzen 7 7800X 3D, which has been paired with the Gigabyte X670E Aorus Master using 32GB of DDR5 6000 CL30 memory. In total, I've tested 40 games at 1080p and 1440p, but I'm just going to cover the more interesting results, and then we'll take a look at the margins across all of the games tested in a single graph. So let's get into it. First up, we have Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and here the 6700 XT and 3060 Ti are neck and neck at both tested resolutions, making the 4060 Ti just 12% faster at 1080p and 8% faster at 1440p. So that's not particularly great news given that the 4060 Ti costs 25% more and the Radeon GPU was released 2.5 years ago. The results seen when testing with the Plague Tale Requiem are even closer, and now it's not just the 6700 XT and 3060 Ti that are delivering similar performance, but also the 4060 Ti, which was just 3% faster than the Radeon GPU at 1080p, with identical performance seen at 1440p. Now, a big problem with the RTX 4060 Ti that I've explored in detail already is of course the 8GB VRAM buffer, as the GPU itself is not only quite expensive, but it is reasonably powerful, despite that 128-bit wide memory bus. The Last of Us Part 1 does play well using the high preset, but for those of you wanting to max out the game, you will require more than 8GB of VRAM, even at 1080p, if you wish to avoid stuttering entirely. But it's the 1440p resolution that's really telling, and a big issue, as 8GB graphics cards like the 4060 Ti are completely unusable, while the 6700 XT was very smooth, despite the sub 60 FPS performance. So it's results like these that don't bode well for the future of Nvidia's new $400 US GPU. Another set of concerning results come the way of Doom Eternal, which exposes another weakness of the RTX 4060 Ti, its heavily restricted 128-bit wide memory bus, resulting in less memory bandwidth than that of past products. Doom highlights this issue really well, as it is a very memory-sensitive game, and as a result, the 6700 XT was 29% faster than the 4060 Ti at 1080p, and an insane 44% faster at 1440p. Granted, the 4060 Ti was still able to deliver very playable performance, but for future, more memory-demanding titles, it's clearly going to struggle. Moving on to Hogwarts Legacy, we see that the 6700 XT and 3060 Ti are again neck and neck, and in this example that means they're both faster than the 4060 Ti, though we are only talking about a 5% margin at 1080p. Still, that is very embarrassing to see. Enabling ray tracing does hand the 4060 Ti an advantage, but even so, here we have a cutting-edge new title, and the 4060 Ti is just 14% faster than the 6700 XT, so again, a very disappointing result here. Next up, we have Resident Evil 4 using the second highest quality preset, and this is yet another example where the 6700 XT and 3060 Ti are very evenly matched, though the Radeon GPU did pull ahead at 1440p. Now, when compared to the 4060 Ti, the 6700 XT was 13% slower at 1080p and 7% slower at 1440p, so not exactly big margins there, and something quite unexpected happens when you enable ray tracing. The max quality RT preset calls for 12GB of VRAM, and this is an issue for the brand new RTX 4060 Ti because, it has 8GB of VRAM and all that. So while the game plays mostly okay after a few updates, performance overall is quite weak, with the 6700 XT offering 36% more frames at 1080p and 33% more at 1440p. Cyberpunk 2077 is yet another game where the 3060 Ti and 6700 XT are very evenly matched, at least without the RTFX enabled. And this meant that the Radeon GPU was just 11% slower than the 4060 Ti at 1080p and 8% slower at 1440p. So while reasonable margins, particularly at 1080p, given the difference in price, the margin is actually more favourable to AMD. Now, enabling ray tracing in Cyberpunk 2077 completely kills the 6700 XT, though to be fair, without the aid of upscaling, it also does much the same to the GeForce GPUs. In any case, the 4060 Ti was 80% faster at 1080p, which is obviously an incredible difference, though keep in mind the 3060 Ti was already 60% faster than the 6700 XT, so this just isn't a good configuration for the Radeon GPU, and as we know, RDNA2 not particularly efficient when it comes to ray tracing performance, which is why we've always recommended GeForce GPUs if you are interested in ray tracing performance. Now next up we have Far Cry 6, and here the 6700 XT is good for 146 FPS at 1080p, despite using the ultra quality preset. This meant it was just 2% faster than the 4060 Ti, so that is another poor result for Nvidia's new $400 US GeForce GPU. And even with ray tracing enabled, the 6700 XT is able to hang in there with the 4060 Ti at 1080p, trailing by a mere 7% margin. Not only that, but at 1440p it was actually faster, albeit by a mere 5% margin, but still, pretty impressive stuff there. Last up, we're going to look at the individual results for F1 23, and again, this is another title where the 3060 Ti and 6700 XT are neck and neck. Also, in this example, the 4060 Ti is faster, though only by a 7% margin at 1080p and 4% at 1440p, so overall, very similar performance seen from all three GPUs. However, if we enable ray tracing with the ultra-high preset, the 6700 XT does run into a spot of bother, similar to what we saw in Cyberpunk 2077, for example. Although still playable at 1080p, the 6700 XT was 32% slower than the 4060 Ti, and that is a massive margin. So you'll certainly want to disable ray tracing if you happen to go with the previous generation Radeon GPU. Okay, so depending on the game, the 6700 XT and RTX 4060 Ti, they could be quite evenly matched, and enabling ray tracing didn't always result in an automatic win for Nvidia. So there were some interesting results for sure, but let's take a look at the 50 game comparison to get a clearer picture of where they stand. Okay, so at 1080p, the 6700 XT was on average just 9% slower than the 4060 Ti, which is a great result for the AMD GPU given it's currently 20% cheaper. We also saw a few examples where the 6700 XT was actually faster, such as Resident Evil 4 using ray tracing, The Last of Us Part 1, Doom Eternal, and Death Stranding as some of the more significant examples. That said though, there are a number of instances where the 6700 XT was much slower than the 4060 Ti, and we have 9 examples where it was slower by a 20% margin or more. Now at 1440p, the margin is reduced to just 7% on average, meaning the 6700 XT was on average just 7% slower than the 4060 Ti at this higher resolution. So while the Radeon GPU was slower than the 4060 Ti more often than not, for the most part the margin was less than 10% in either direction. In fact, for 56% of all configurations tested, we only saw single-digit margins. Now, for those of you not interested in ray tracing performance, I've removed any configuration with RTFX enabled, and doing so reduces the margin at 1080p to just 6%. Now we have just 3 examples where the 6700 XT was slower by a 20% margin or greater. And for those of you not interested in ray tracing but wish to game at 1440p, the difference is even smaller. Here the 6700 XT was just 4% slower on average, which is very similar to the 5% margin seen in our day one review. So depending on what you're after and the games you play, the difference between these two GPUs could be quite small. Okay, so if you're after an affordable GPU for 1440p gaming in mid-2023, your options are extremely limited. Unless you want to spend $600 US, there's really no current generation GPU. The next best thing we're aware of here is the upcoming 16GB version of the RTX 4060 Ti, but for $500, it'll basically deliver what we've seen from the 8GB model with a few fixes for games such as Doom Eternal, Resident Evil 4, and The Last of Us Part 1, which will boost the overall result by a few percent while costing almost 60% more than existing 6700 XT stock. And it's really nice to see Nvidia charging their customers a $100 premium to kind of fix their own product for modern games. But short of the upcoming 16GB RTX 4060 Ti, you either need to spend $600 on an RTX 4070 to get a 12GB buffer, or downgrade to an RTX 3060 12GB for $290, but it's around 25% slower than the 6700 XT for roughly a 10% saving, so not really worth it. Therefore, it's really either a 6700 XT for between $320 and $350 US, or an RTX 4070 for $600 US, and that makes picking an affordable 1440p GPU rather easy. Obviously get the 6700 XT and hope you can get in before stock dries up. And sadly, those near $300 US 6700 XT listings aren't as common as they once were, suggesting that stock might be finally starting to dry up, though I'm not sure about that one. And at the time of making this video, the Sapphire Pulse version is available from Newegg for just $320 US, so that's a particularly great buy, that one. But looking forward, even after the very last sub $350 US 6700 XT is sold, that doesn't mean that the RTX 4060 Ti instantly becomes a good product. At $400 US, it's always going to be a poor offering that you should avoid if possible. The fact that it barely moves the needle forward when compared to the 2.5-year-old GeForce product it's replacing, so the RTX 3060 Ti, that's just bad. And somehow it even manages to be slower in quite a few games. Anyway, the best advice I can give you right now, if you need an affordable GPU for 1440p gaming, is to snap up a cheap Radeon RX 6700 XT before stock runs out. And that is going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed this one, please do give it a like. You can subscribe for more content. Also, we do have Floatplane or Patreon if you want to get more Hardware Unboxed goodness. We have behind the scenes content, Q&As, our live streams that Tim and I do for you guys each month, and an exclusive Discord server where you can chat, hang out, and again, talk with Tim and myself there. So pretty cool stuff. If you're interested, check it out. But if not, that is perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.